Hello, Felix here again, one of Herod's mercenaries from the mountains in the north of Italy, Cisalpine Gaul, but actually working for the Romans. I told you last time about our journey to Bethlehem, where we had to watch out and guard and just make sure that everything was okay as the people travelled from all over the parts of Israel, in our case from Galilee, down to Bethlehem, ready for the great census. I told you about Matthias, our interpreter, and I talking about his cousin Joseph and his, soon-to-be wife, and should have been wife, if it hadn't been for the disruption caused by the census, Mary, and how they were having to go down to Bethlehem when she was almost ready to give birth to her child. As Matthias said, the one who had been predicted by the angel and the one who was going to be God's son. That was very strange for me, and I'd seen some pretty strange things recently, particularly up in the hill country, where we'd seen the result of an angel after the whole story had scared our Germanian friends, who were also mercenaries for Herod. Yes, we'd seen a dumb man speak. We'd seen the birth of a child, a boy, who was supposed to be the forerunner, the one that Eli had told us about a long time ago on our trip down to Jericho. Now Matthias had said that he also had family in Bethlehem, and that's why he had to go too for the census. Well, 2 or 3 days later after that, we were on patrol in Bethlehem itself. I often wondered what had happened to Joseph and Mary, whether they had actually managed to find somewhere where she could give birth to her child. I often wondered about that. But, there were other more important things, I suppose. We were now in the town itself, or should I say, in the city, because, as I told you before, it was the city of David. And there was that feeling that an awful lot of David's descendants would have been there, and maybe if there was going to be any trouble during the census at all, both for Herod and for Quirinius, the governor of the Syria province, then it might just happen in Bethlehem, when all those descendants of the great King David got together. But so far, so good. No problem whatsoever. Actually, when I was off duty, it was pretty good. We weren't in tents, we were actually billeted in some of the houses, and there was a chance to have a look around Bethlehem and see what it was like, see what was going on. It was very, very crowded. And the greatest part of it for me, actually, was when Matthias invited me to go to meet his family and have a meal with them. That was, I suppose, quite an honour, really, but we were so good friends by now. And, as I told you last time, he said that he felt that he could trust me, and I could trust him too. We'd seen quite a few things together, and that story that he told me about Joseph and Mary and the angel appearing to them both at separate times seemed to sort of seal the bond between us. It was a good meal. I met his mother and his father, one of his grandparents, I forget which one it was, his mother's father or his father's father, and I met more of the relatives and, I must admit, most importantly for my future, although I didn't know it at the time, I met his sister Esther. But that's another story. But here we were, back on patrol, at night. I didn't like night duty, in fact none of us did. Night duty, it was miserable, it was cold. That warm in the day and cold at night that you get in this country, I never quite got used to it. Cold during the day and cold at night up in the mountains, or warm during the day and not too bad in the night up in the mountains where I came from, that wasn't bad. It was the contrast between the really hot, dusty days and the cold, almost, I won't say freezing, but it felt it in your bones night. Well, this particular night, we were out on duty in twos, and we were walking around very, very carefully around Bethlehem, making sure that We went carefully round corners just in case, not that anything had ever happened. When suddenly my eyes were taken by a light right up in the hills. It was a very, very faint light, but a light nevertheless. I said to my companion, "Well, if that's a shepherd's fire, it's a very big fire." "Is there anything up there?" he said. "Anything up there that could burn?" "Not as far as I know," I said. "We've both seen shepherd's fires up there before, up on the hills, but not as bright as that." We stood for 4 or 5 minutes watching, but nothing happened. The light didn't get any brighter. The light didn't get any less bright. There was no sound or anything, and we looked around in the street. There was nobody else there, nobody looking, and then suddenly the light went. Now that was a bit peculiar. "Somebody's doused the fire," my companion said. I said, "I think we'd better tell the officer of the watch. Fires don't usually go out just like that. It'll need an awful lot of buckets of water thrown on that fire for that fire to suddenly die altogether." He said. So that's what we did. We made our way to the rooms where our officer of the watch was waiting, and he was on duty. Say rooms, he was being very careful, keeping patrols out and getting all the reports. And we told him about the light. He said, "Keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open very, very carefully. Keep your weapons ready just in case." One of the other pairs have also reported it, and I've sent them out, well, in fours now. Half a tent party. "Oh," he said. We laughed. We knew the problem. Our officers and us sometimes slipped back into our proper Roman talk. A tent party, 8 men. We had to be very careful that Herod didn't hear that. He thought that we were some way criminals from somewhere under Roman officers, rather than proper, fully fledged Roman auxiliaries. We had to be very careful. So we waited about 10-15 minutes till 2 more of the tent party came in, and the 4 of us went out together. The streets were quiet. There were 1 or 2 people around who looked sort of suspiciously at us, and we looked very suspiciously at them, giving them the evil eye, as one of my companions said, looking stern, hand on sword, shield upright. Not that there was any danger, but we felt that we needed to, well, I suppose, impress the natives, as our officers had once said. Sometimes that's hurt, because, let's face it, where I came from and the rest of us came from in Cisalpine Gaul, we were the natives. Just so happened that we were here in Jerusalem, or rather, should I say, we were here in Bethlehem. All these places. Sometimes we march so long and we go to so many different places, you forget where you are. I just did. Well, the 4 of us were keeping very careful watch on the streets, and suddenly we heard a noise. People talking. Quite a few people talking quite excitedly. This was strange, but they were talking so loudly and so excitedly that we thought, well, it's not going to be a sneak attack or anything like that. We waited to see who was coming. Then round the corner of the square where we were standing, came, well, a rather unusual sight, particularly this time of night. Shepherds. Shepherds chatting away like mad, looking right, left and centre, some of them pointing, yes, it's that way, it's that way. They went past us, gave us a quick look and went past us, heading in a direction that they pretty well knew where they were going, but we couldn't think why they were down from the hills and why were they going in that direction. And then suddenly, into the square, very slowly, supported by 2 of the other shepherds and leaning on a rather large stick, was my old friend Eli. I daren't stop the gaze, the official stance. Sadly, that though, he waved, but I gave him the evil eye, the I'm here on duty look. I don't know you look, but I couldn't help a sort of a grin. But Eli didn't do anything except hobble on with the others as fast as he could with that stick. And that really confused me. What on earth were they doing down from the hills? Who was looking after the sheep? Time passed. 10, 15 minutes, maybe an hour. Maybe an hour. And then suddenly, a commotion. And that's the only word I can use about it. A commotion. We wondered what on earth it was. We had our hands on our swords, we had our shields ready. The four of us stood there waiting. Sounds of running feet and shouting and yelling. At that point, all we could hear was one word, and we couldn't work out what it was. And then suddenly, as they came closer, I caught the word that I'd heard before. I'd heard from Eli and I'd heard from Matthias. Messiah, Messiah, as they came racing past us. And it was the shepherds, shouting and yelling and singing and just happy, in fact, more than happy. We scattered through the square in different directions. A few people at the other side of the square were grabbed by the shepherds and being told something in so fast I couldn't pick up a thing. And then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw somebody running towards me, running straight at me. For the moment, I went to grab my sword and pull it out of its scabbard, but it was Eli. Eli rushed straight up to me. Straight up to me. "You'll never guess what," he said. "You'll never guess what I've seen, Felix. You'll never guess who I've seen." I looked. The three companions were looking at me now and looking at him. I had to say something, but I couldn't get a word out because Eli was saying, "We've seen him. We've seen him. We've seen him. God's son. He's in a stable. He's been born. And it's God's son. And the angel told us." "What do you mean, the angel?" said one of my companions. I was up on the hills. I wasn't at the camp, and there was this huge light." Well, we knew about the light. We'd seen it. There was this huge light and sounds and singing and shouting. And when I got there, all my friends said, "It's angels." And we had to go to this stable or where they keep the animals, behind an inn, down Grey Street or somewhere. That's what you call it, isn't it? Grey Street. And we just went, and we went in, and there was this young man and this young woman, and the animals were still there, and a baby in a feeding trough of all places. And he was God's son. I looked at Eli. I still couldn't say anything. My mind was racing. It just went back to the hill country, to the birth of that baby John, to the fact that his father, who was struck dumb, could suddenly speak when he'd written down, "His name is John," very clearly. The man who'd been struck dumb by an angel, and then could speak again when he had to say, "His name is John," the forerunner. Out of the corner of my eyes, I could see Matthias coming round the corner. He was smiling. He saw Eli, and he looked at Eli, and he looked at me. And Eli just said, "It's true, it's true. And have you noticed something? Look, look." And he ran round the square, waving his hands in the air. He was almost skipping. The hairs went up the back of my neck. Eli, who'd been terribly injured in a rock fall or slide or whatever it was, who we'd heard had been crippled and could never walk properly again, or always needed a stick, was running round the square. I was going to say something to him, but he raced past me. I can walk, I can run. And he disappeared down the street. Matthias was standing there. My other three companions were looking around, absolutely dazed, but I just looked at Matthias. He coughed and nodded. Come this way a minute. I'm just going to talk to our interpreter, I said, see what this is all about. I went over to the corner of the square. Matthias smiled. I think it's true. What? I said. You know what, he said. You know exactly what. We've seen the birth of the forerunner. I think they've seen the Messiah, the one that's supposed to come. I looked at him. And I thought of Eli running round the square and shouting, I can walk, I can run. I thought of his excitement in his face. Eli wasn't one to tell tales, always a good storyteller, but not to tell tales. What can I do? I said. Don't say a word to anybody, said Matthias. They're not going to believe you. Besides, what's the point? It's been given to those of us who believe. When he said those of us who believe, he looked me straight in the face. I don't even need to have to ask, do I? Said Matthias. You believe, don't you? I'd heard so many stories over the years, but I'd seen that baby born, and I'd seen the results of his father. And I'd heard Matthias's story about his sort of cousin Joseph and his betrothed Mary, and something told me, yes, possibly that is true. Is it Joseph and Mary? I said. I think it might be, said Matthias. They were stuck in some stable behind the inn on Grey Street. Should we go and have a look? I don't think so, said Matthias. I think it might. Before he could say anything, I laughed. Matthias laughed, because he knew what I thought about cut a long story short. Yes. So we didn't. We didn't go and look. We didn't go and see if it actually was his sort of cousin Joseph and Mary his betrothed. We didn't even go to look at the baby. But something told me, and I know it told Matthias, that all the stories and the history had come true. That we'd been there when both of the parts had happened. The forerunner and the Messiah. In years to come, after other things had happened too, I knew that we weren't wrong, and that when we believed for a very good reason.